Hello and welcome to Bring the Ring, a new way to handbell. My name is Brenda Austin, and it is my sincere hope that through connecting with us today, you will be inspired to use handbells to make a difference, to add value to our world. Let's get out there and bring the ring.
Hello and welcome to Bring the Ring. My name is Brenda Austin and I'm the editor at Hope Publishing. And we are looking to connect with one another, especially during this kind of difficult time where we're not able to attend conferences and festivals. We want to still be able to connect and reach out to one another to figure out ways that we can help each other. So we're talking to composers and finding out about their process and how they work and a little bit about their music. And today's special guest is Lloyd Larson. I am thrilled to have this composing powerhouse with us today. Lloyd has over 1,500 published compositions. In addition to his fine work for Handbells, he has written many choral anthems, extended Easter, Christmas, non seasonal works, keyboard collections, vocal solos and duets, instrumental works, and orchestrations. Truly, he is a prolific writer, and I'm thrilled to have him. So let's welcome Lloyd Larson. Great to have you with us here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Brenda. Nice to be with you, and I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. See, a lot of handheld people don't know you. They've not had the opportunity to meet you. And so tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, how you got into composition.
Well, my background is in church music. I prepared. I had a sense of that was my calling. That was where my passions were, combining my music training, my music experiences with my faith, and I had the opportunity, both in my undergrad and my graduate work, to prepare to serve the local church in music ministry. And I don't think ever in my wildest dreams in those days did I ever anticipate that I would one day make my full-time living as a composer, as an arranger, and a contributor to church music publications for the most part. But
Sure.
that's kind of how it all evolved and developed. But going back to college days, I was one of those theory nerds, the guy who decided, if 2 years of theory were required, that I wanted to take the third one if it was offered, and took the extra arranging and the composition classes and those kinds of things. I just always enjoyed that, and a lot of it had to do, I think, with my piano background. Really enjoyed the writing piece of it, but it was more of a hobby, more of an interest. And a lot of my initial writing was done in response to pragmatic needs that I had in my own local churches that I began serving, even going back to college days. I remember, for example, in the very first church I served while I was a student at Anderson University in Indiana, I began serving in my senior year of college in a small church in Kokomo, Indiana. But we happened to have the local band director who was a part of our music ministry there, and he was a fabulous trumpet player. And so I began to write some hymn arrangements that he would play in church, for offertories or preludes or whatever. But at the same time, I had, as we all have had over the years, I had the seventh or eighth grade trumpet player who was much more proficient with half notes and dotted halves and whole notes than he was with eighths or sixteenths. And so I found myself writing kind of a tailor-made hymn arrangement that worked for these guys to play a duet together. And so those kinds of things, and writing material that was usable in my own local church setting, is what kind of drove the creative process for me in some of my very earliest writing.
Sure, sure. I think that's how a lot of us cut our teeth in
It
composition
really
is
is.
that we need something specific and there's nothing out there. And so then we start writing for it. It's a great way to get going.
Yeah, and we understand the culture, the nature, and the musical uh, parameters of our own local church music ministries, and that was how all that came about.
How did you actually kind of break into getting it published and being a well known published composer?
Well, one of the interesting things was, I think it was back in the mid 80s, I was contacted to help lead a festival in our area because they knew that I did handbells in my own church, and so they contacted me to be one of the directors in this particular festival. At the same time, they also knew me as a published choral writer, and they said, "Well, do you write for handbells?" Well, I'd done a little writing, tailoring some arrangements, like we just talked about, with my own church handbell choirs. And so I said, "Well, yeah, I do some of that." So they commissioned me to do a handbell setting of the hymn, "O Worship the King," the Lions hymn tune for "O Worship the King." And so I wrote that. And interestingly enough, Brenda, this has been before you were there, when in the days of David Weck, but Hope published that very first handbell piece. So it got a lot of mileage and a lot of use, and I understand a lot of groups picked it up over the years. And so yeah, that was my entry into the handbell world as a writer. I since have gotten to conduct and be the guest conductor at a number of handbell festivals across the country. And those have all been great learning experiences. When you talk about how do you learn, for me, it's been on the job training. It's kind of like being a parent. The on the job training is how it happened. And that's really how I kind of learned to write for handbells, by being involved in leadership, both as a director, as a ringer. In more recent years, I've actually been a ringer in more recent years, as I've played the bottom bells of a 5-octave set in our own church in a handbell group that my wife has directed. I've been more involved as a ringer here in more recent years, after probably 20 years as a director in the local church and community settings.
And you continued with your music ministry, right? Even though you were basically a full-time composer and editor, you continued in your music ministry, right?
I did, yeah, and that's been vital to me. Just it's kind of where my heart is. But I also felt like when I walked into a workshop setting, I often said, the most significant credential that I bring into the room is that I do what you all do week in and week out in my own local church.
Mm-hmm.
So being involved in choral ministries and handbell ministries and worship leadership, all of that, those are vital to me. And quite frankly, they have impacted significantly the way I've chosen to work and to write over the years.
Mm-hmm. I think it makes a huge difference when you've got boots on the ground and you know what the challenges are and the struggles are for the local ministries. When you are there in the trenches with us, I think you write more appropriately for us then.
I agree, and you understand that well because you were in the same boat.
Yep.
That's what we do. It's what drives us, and I think it's a part of the passion that we have for our music ministry, and being able to blend that with our faith just makes it even that much more significant and impactful, I believe.
Yes, yes. Well, we're going to talk about a couple pieces today. Why don't we start with the ringing with keys? This was a kind of a new thing we decided to try. Tell us a little bit about that and how, particularly in this time of less ringers and pandemic ringing and all that, how it might be useful.
Well, I actually think that when we started this particular concept, you and I began discussing it even before we were into a COVID world.
Right.
And to realize how it has been such a fortuitous timing in all of this to bring us together. But ringing with keys is really what the title suggests. It's a combination of handbells and keyboard, or in this case, piano. We conceived of it as a project that had some flexibility, that could be done with smaller forces. It is scored for 1.5 to 2 octaves of bells. So you're talking about, if you're using a full 2-octave complement of bells, you're talking about G4 to G6, the traditional 2-octave range. If you're talking about 1.5 octaves, the lower bells, in other words, from C5 to G4 going down, those handbells are actually optional. So it can be done with, depending on how much 4-in-hand you employ, it can be done with 4, maybe 5 ringers easily. If you want to keep it in that 1.5 octave range, or you can expand out a little bit more depending on the experience and the skill level of your ringers. These are not difficult arrangements by any stretch. And I don't know about you, but in my own experience, I find that my handbell ringers play with a little more confidence when they feel like they're being reinforced sometimes by a keyboard player, an organist
Mhm.
or pianist. And so
Absolutely.
that's what's going on here. These are accessible, readily learned. Um, there are, I think there eight arrangements, and they are usable for the entire church year. We've got Thanksgiving represented, we've got Christmas represented, Holy Week, Easter or Eastertide. We've got a few general hymns. These are readily recognized hymns. One of the other, I think, practical aspects of this project is these arrangements are reproducible. So you buy the book and you can use it with the smaller group one time, and you can use it with the larger group the next time, and you have everything you need right in this one single resource.
Mhm.
So that's the goal, and to realize how beneficial and helpful something like this has been, where we've had limited kinds of opportunities to run our programs like normal, and with the full forces, it's I think been proven already to be a very practical and useful resource.
Hmm. And really, you can pull these together pretty quickly if you've got, a big choir normally that's used to ringing bigger things, that this could just get it together, which has been something I have needed. We haven't been wanting to spend the hours in rehearsal. We need things we can kind of pull together quickly. So
And
I think
also for lesser experienced and younger ringers, I think it's a good resource for
it's a great,
that as well.
a great entry point. I think that's one of the neatest things about what's happening with this COVID is we are getting so much more ensemble music and 12 bell music. And yes, it's great for our smaller ensembles or their bigger ensembles that need a smaller thing right now. But even just to get people going as an entry point, that these would be a great way for developing ringers, brand new ringers. They'd have that confidence of the piano behind them, and they're not real difficult. So it'd be a great entry point.
Yeah, well, that's what's going on with ringing with keys, and I think we're going to hear one of those, right?
Yep. What Child Is This is the one that we recorded. So we will listen
Okay.
to that one. That was just wonderful, Lloyd. Thank you. I think that those arrangements can be very useful to choirs now and later.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for
So,
suggesting the idea.
well, absolutely. So I just have a question for you. As you know, I often am struggling to come up with new ideas. Oh, I've already done this. So how, after having 1,500 compositions that are already published, how do you continue to come up with fresh ideas, new ideas? How do you reinvent yourself?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges for all of us, regardless of what our vocation is, to try to keep our passion alive, our ideas fresh. And I try not to get too far ahead of myself. I just try to focus on whatever the project is for that day. I want to immerse myself fully in that. Um, I think as an arranger, as a composer, particularly when I'm thinking chorally, I want to make sure in the sacred context that I allow the text to come through, that it is front and center, and so that whatever I do musically doesn't detract from that. But I also think when you think in terms of handbell material, and much of what I've done over the years in my own work in the handbell world has been familiar melodies. I've done some original material as well, but oftentimes it has to do with familiar hymn tunes. And so I want the familiar melody because I know when a congregation or a listener is hearing a familiar hymn tune, what's rolling around in their heads oftentimes is the text. And so this familiar melody speaks to them in a unique and distinctive way. And oftentimes it ties back to the text. So I think that the melody needs to be front and center. But when I think in terms of trying to keep ideas fresh, I'm always hopeful that that I don't repeat myself. I know that that's a risk. That John Carter used to tell me that there is a real fine balance to be struck between finding, your own distinctive voice that will have some characteristics probably from piece to piece. I mean, J.S. Bach still sounds like J.S. Bach, from one piece
Right.
to another.
Right.
And yet he was prolific and his ideas were fresh and they were new. And so to continue to seek after that, and I find that one of the best ways to do that for me is even listening to other writers, because they spawn new ideas. When I hear, a setting of a text, or I hear a new setting of a familiar melody, a hymn arrangement, or whatever, I'm listening for ideas that have been employed, and hopefully that will spur a thought, an idea, help me push me into maybe a new area of territory that I haven't experienced before. So you're always looking, and I think as a musician, as a composer, you're always listening and looking for fresh ideas in that regard.
Sure. I think that's just always the biggest challenge. And for me, it is absolutely, I need to dive in and study somebody else's work when I need new ideas.
Yeah.
Listen, study the pieces, look at the harmony, the rhythms, and that helps keep it fresh for me.
Without question. And I think the other thing too is to try to be to vary yourselves and to experience as a writer writing in different styles, using different genres of influence to direct you into some new avenues. I just think all of that is helpful for me. Because if I live in one world too long, it can be a problematic. In fact, when I'm working on even a handbell collection, I really do not like to sit down and do that handbell collection in one fell swoop. I'd like to vary the texture. I'll go from handbells maybe to working on a choral project, or working on a piano book, or something like that, just to keep my voice, my own voice, fresh. And that's important to me as well, because I don't want the churches like your church or my church or any other church to come back and say, oh, here's Larson. We know what he's going to sound like. I'd like for them to be surprised from time to time, and say, okay, I'd like for them to be able to say, by seeing my name, that they feel like they can trust the music and believe that it will be crafted in such a way that it will be challenging and meaningful and inspiring.
Mhm.
but I'd like for them to be surprised musically by what they might encounter.
Sure. I sometimes will set up little boundaries for myself or tricks that, okay, you have to do this, you can't do that, just to try to challenge myself. Or I've arranged songs that I don't care for. Like, this is not one that I really like, but I want the discipline of bringing it to life. And by one of them I wrote, and I thought, oh, well, I kind of like this by the time I was done with it.
Right. No, I hear you. And sometimes you sit down and you say, oh, I have to do something else with Joy to the World.
Right.
Um, how do you keep that fresh? Maybe it's my first handbell arrangement with Joy to the World, but I've done maybe 2 or 3 settings of it in some other kinds of ways. What am I going to do with it today? And so that becomes one of the challenges too.
Sure. Yes. I'm guessing once you have that many pieces under your belt, you've done Joy to the World and O Come All Ye Faithful 1 or 2 times.
Hold on, yes.
Well, one of the things that we kind of stumbled on, but has been a great success, is these pieces that are for full handbell ensemble, 3 to 5 octaves, but then also with piano, and it's a bit of a duet. So, talk to us a little bit about how that genre was born.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Hope Publishing has been one of the real trailblazers in creating this line of product, essentially. And I have found it valuable and a wonderful thing to even sink my teeth into as an arranger. Um, because my initial experiences with handbells was handbells were the thing. We didn't combine them very often with other keyboard kinds of experiences, with any kind of keyboard experiences like organ or piano or whatever. But all of a sudden we found out there were churches that were doing this kind of thing and seeking more options in terms of literature. And so you all came to me, and I know Joel Rainey's done some of this, and probably a few others as well. But in particular, to ask us to consider taking our piano backgrounds and blending that with our writing approaches to handbells. And boy, it's been real fun because what we're finding, I think, at least what I've found, I think Joel has said the same thing, is that we can take a section of a piece and feature the piano for a bit, and all of a sudden the handbell becomes kind of the background, the accompaniment. And then other times it goes exactly the opposite, and where the handbells certainly are featured and the prominent instrument. And I would say in general that would be an apt characterization of these arrangements throughout. I mean, we're still featuring the handbells, and the piano is serving largely as accompaniment. But to be able to kind of switch it up a little bit, and there are times when we drop the piano out altogether, and it becomes a keyboard. I mean, becomes a handbell part all by itself, and sometimes even a little bit of the opposite. But it's been well received, and it's been a creative and interesting challenge for those of us who are creating some of these resources. And the market seems to say we like them and we want to see more. So that, I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I've done a few of them with my choir, and they've been kind of nice because, again, they're not real difficult. They're more on the level 2.
Yep.
And so maybe if we've got a big piece that we're really sinking our teeth into, but we want something else that we don't have to spend as many hours on. And they always sound so fabulous with that piano, because sometimes with the handbells, if you add too much chromaticism and whatnot, then you've upped the level. So give it to
Yep.
the piano player, and
Exactly.
all of a sudden you have the rich harmonies, but without 17 bell changes.
Right. No, and I've truly enjoyed being able to be a part of this in a small way to contribute, and hopefully we'll have opportunities to do more of this as we move forward.
I think so. I think so. People have liked them, and as long as people still find use for them, then we'll keep creating them.
Right.
We're going to listen today to On Eagle's Wings. And of course, On Eagle's Wings has such a beautiful text. I'm sure we're all thinking of the text as we are playing through it. Tell us a little bit about maybe your process specifically to this piece.
Well, this, of course, is Michael Jankus hymn, which has come to us from the Roman Catholic tradition, but it has been embraced by all of us, whether you come from Roman Catholic or Protestant traditions, and it's made its way into many of our hymnals. And so it's one of those inspirational hymns which has found great meaning in our worship traditions. Um, this particular arrangement, I actually had done a choral arrangement of this for Hope Publishing a number of years ago. And I actually grabbed some of the ideas intentionally from that particular arrangement to help frame this. But again, it's done in very much the same manner that we were just describing this particular idiom. It's full of rich harmonies. The accompaniment, because of there are plenty of 16th notes in the accompaniment, but those are a little more sparingly employed in the handbell part. So it does make it accessible, readily learned. I think this is at a level 2. Yeah, it's level 2, and but it's one of those melodies that just stays with you as you experience it in a concert or worship setting. And I just think that it's rich in text, but rich in harmony, which is why it works so well for handbells and piano in this genre. So it came together very nicely for me when we began to tackle it, I thought, and it gives a chance for the piano to be featured at times and for the handbells to be featured at times, but yet the melody comes through front and center throughout the entire arrangement. You got from the reflective moments to the celebratory moments and everything in between. So that's what it is. It's On Eagle's Wings. The anthem, the hymn speaks for itself. And hopefully this will find its place in an inspirational moment of worship or concert for a lot of handbell groups.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hope so too. But we'll take a listen here. That was just lovely. I love that hymn, but your setting of this, I think, is so poignant. Well done. Well done.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I can hear the melody throughout and I can hear the words. And actually, I haven't done this yet with my choir, but when I do, I will probably like literally write the text in and we will talk about the text as we go,
Yeah.
because I think it'll be more meaningful to our handball ensemble if they really are thinking of the text as they're playing it. What advice would you have, Lloyd, for either generally or during this time of kind of isolation during the pandemic? What advice do you have for ringers or directors or even budding composers?
Keep the faith. Be encouraged. I have oftentimes described this pandemic in my own mind as a very long Lenten season, with the hope that we hang on to the hope that eventually Resurrection Day will come. It has been, it has tested all of us. It's been challenging. It's been difficult. Um, we've had different perspectives represented in our music programs and our churches by people who thought we were either being way too cautious or not cautious enough, and everything in between. We've got them in our church. You've had them in your church. We simply have had to simply decide that we were going to agree to disagree at times, but to hold on to the hope that one of these days, this is going to be in our rearview mirrors. And so I have kept plugging away, writing, encouraging the musicians in my own church setting, encouraging composers that I work with to simply keep being faithful to the calling, to be faithful to the task that's before us. Because when that day arrives eventually, and it will, when that day arrives eventually, I think people are going to come out of the woodwork and say, I am ready to sing again. I am ready to ring again. I'm ready to proclaim the praises of God in a collective kind of way with the people in my church, in my community, in my ensembles, in my area where I live and breathe. And we just have to hold on to the light, which is at the end of this very long and dark tunnel. And when that day does arrive, it's going to be a glorious time for all of us. I really believe that. And there are days it's easier to say that than others. I will grant you that and acknowledge that. But I still hold on to that hope that one of these days this is going to be behind us and it's going to be a glorious day for all of us.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that message of hope. We will persevere and we will be ringing and singing together. And I think you're right. I think that we will see a resurrection of our music programs. So thank you for that vision of hope.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it was awesome to have you on, Lloyd. I'm glad that Handbell folks are going to get to know you a little bit, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. Thanks for what you do. And thanks to all of you for what you do to bring joy and energy and life into our music ministries through Handbells.
Thanks for joining us today. Brenda Austin is the Handbell Editor for Hope Publishing, where we are equipping musicians for excellence. Visit hopepublishing.com or call 1-800-323-1049 for all your music needs. For questions about this episode of Bring the Ring, contact Brenda at hopepublishing.com. Our show notes can be found on our Facebook page or in the comments below.